Time is a river. We are taught that it flows only forward. We are told the past is fixed, a story already written. I believed that. I was a man of science. Evidence and proof were my foundation. My name is Dr. Aris Thorne. I was a forensic analyst for the Metropolitan Police. My work was to speak for the dead, to find truth in the smallest traces they left behind. I never imagined I would become evidence myself, a misplaced clue in the most infamous unsolved case in history. The device was called a chronoresonance spectrometer. It was designed to scan the molecular echo of a crime scene and reveal the past as a living image. A marvel in theory. But theory is fragile. A power surge, a chain reaction, and the world dissolved. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Thick coal smoke, rotting refuse, a metallic tang of blood in cold night air. This was not my lab, no sterile white lights, no humming servers. I was standing in a narrow alley, fog settling on wet brick walls and slick cobblestones beneath my feet. My modern clothing felt thin and exposed. Then I saw her, a woman, lying still in the shadows. Pale skin catching the faint moonlight. My training took hold. I knelt beside her. The injuries were brutal and deliberate. This was not theft. This was rage given form. I reached for my forensic kit, but it was gone. I had nothing, no tools, no authority, nothing familiar. Then I heard the whistles, growing louder. I was a stranger, dressed wrongly, crouched over a mutilated body. In any time period, that is a death sentence. I backed into the shadows. 2 constables entered the alley, lantern light cutting through the fog. They saw the body. Then they saw me. One shouted. I ran through streets I recognized only from photographs and history books. London, but not my London, a city of smoke, fear, and narrow passages. I was not only lost, I was being hunted. And the true killer was there, somewhere in the darkness, watching. And he had seen my face. I hid in the dark for what felt like hours, though it may have only been minutes. The city was unfamiliar, yet every detail was painfully real. The fog, the lantern glow, the coarse shouts of the constables. I tried to slow my breathing, to make sense of what had happened. But then I saw it, a discarded newspaper lying in the gutter, damp and torn. I picked it up. My hands shook as I read the date. September 1st, 1888. London, Whitechapel, the night Polly Nichols was murdered. The realization struck me with a force that felt physical. I had not witnessed some reenactment or illusion. I had not seen a projection of the past. I was standing inside it. And the woman I had just knelt beside was the first canonical victim of Jack the Ripper. I could not comprehend the scale of it. Time travel was fiction, theory, hypothetical equations written in chalk. And yet the smell of coal smoke was real. The wet cobbles under my hands were real. The blood on my fingers was real. I needed to think. I needed to survive. My clothes marked me instantly as an outsider. I searched the narrow streets for cover. Laundry hung between tenement buildings, damp and heavy. I found a rough wool coat and a worn cap left to dry and took them. I hated myself for the theft, but necessity won. My modern wristwatch was useless now. I removed it and tucked it into my pocket. I tried to disappear into the night. But Whitechapel was a maze of narrow lanes and darkness. Every sound felt like a threat. Every shadow felt inhabited. I kept moving, staying to the edges where the lamplight thinned. I watched, I listened, I learned. The slang, the gestures, the rhythms of a world I had only read about. Days passed, or nights. Time blurred. I became a ghost moving among the living. I tried to warn the women who worked the streets, but my words sounded strange, desperate. They laughed, shrugged me off, or simply walked away. I was an outsider among the forgotten. Then came the second murder. Annie Chapman. I was there that night. I saw a shape in the darkness of Hanbury Street. A man of average height, coat pulled tight, his movements deliberate and unhurried. I called out to him. He did not run. He simply melted into shadow, leaving Annie behind. I reached her too late. But something was different this time. A piece of my stolen coat was left beside her body, cut cleanly, placed with intention. It was a message. I see you. I know you. The killer was aware of me. A presence stepping outside his script. I was no longer just a man lost in time. I was now a variable in the pattern of his violence, and he wanted me to know it. As the days passed, fear settled over me, like another layer of clothing. The city felt smaller. The darkness felt watchful. I could feel him, not as a shadow, but as a mind, observing, calculating, adjusting to my interference. This was no mad butcher stumbling through alleys. This was someone precise, someone in control, someone who understood the power of terror. And I had interfered with his design. What I did next would define whether I survived or became part of the legend. I realized I could not keep reacting. I had to act. If I simply followed the events I already knew, I would always be too late. The murders were spaced by nights and weeks, but for me, every moment felt like a countdown. I began mapping the city in my mind. Street layouts, workhouse locations, the pubs where the women gathered for warmth. I watched faces. I listened for patterns. I stopped sleeping. I became something like a hunter, but I was hunting a ghost made of whispers and smoke. The city grew colder, both in weather and feeling. Tension settled over Whitechapel. The people moved differently, more cautious, more afraid. But they were also resigned. Violence was not new here, only the precision was. One night, while staying in a cheap lodging house, I was approached by a man, pale skin, tired eyes, a calmness that felt unnatural. He asked me a simple question, one I did not understand at first. He said, "Do you believe a man can shape history with his hands?" I answered carefully, and he smiled, not kindly, not cruelly, just knowingly. And then he walked away, disappearing into the fog before I could speak again. I did not realize until later who he was. That night, I made a choice. I would not try to stop him at the scene of the next murder. I would confront him before it, not as a witness, not as a historian, but as a man who had seen enough. I returned to Hanbury Street. I found a vantage where I could watch unnoticed. The hours dragged, the streets emptied, the fog thickened around the lamplight like a living thing. Every sound sharpened, the scrape of boots, the echo of carriage wheels, the distant clatter of taverns shutting down. Then I heard it, the faint rhythm of steps behind me. Slow, measured, approaching without hesitation. I turned. He stood a few paces away, silhouetted in pale orange lamplight. The same coat, the same calm stillness, the same presence I had felt watching me in the nights that followed. Not a madman, not a creature of chaos, but something far more terrible. A man who believed his actions had purpose. We stared at one another in silence. Time itself seemed to hold its breath. I understood then that he did not fear being caught. He did not fear death. He believed himself beyond consequence. And in that moment, I was no longer only a visitor in history. I had become part of the story, and there was no way back. I came to understand that this was not merely a chase, it was a study. Two minds locked across time and intention. I followed him because I had to, but he allowed it, because he wanted me to. Every step through Whitechapel's labyrinth of alleys was guided not only by instinct, but by a growing awareness of how deeply he understood the city. The streets were his accomplice, the shadows were his allies, and the fog was his disguise. But I was learning. Every corner held meaning. Every silence carried weight. I walked the same lanes where lives had ended and legends had begun. I stood where history had hardened into myth. Yet nothing felt distant or academic. It was immediate, raw, alive. The damp brick walls, the lingering smell of coal smoke, the sound of boots echoing on wet stone. I absorbed it all. Each night I felt myself changing, becoming quieter, sharper, less of a visitor, more of a participant. The city itself seemed to watch me. Lanterns flickered like eyes half open. Tenement windows glowed with brief flashes of movement. I felt the presence of lives stacked upon lives, pressed into these narrow streets. Poverty had shaped this place, hardship had scarred it. But something else moved through it now, something deliberate. Then I found the mark, a cross carved deep into the bricks behind a butcher's shop. Fresh, edges sharp, white stone exposed beneath soot. It was not graffiti, not a symbol of faith. It was a message, a signal, a call meant only for me. He knew I had followed his trail. He knew I had seen what others didn't. And this mark was his acknowledgement. The game was no longer unspoken. I felt no triumph, only a cold understanding. I was no longer the hidden observer. I had stepped into the narrative. I had become a variable, and he was adapting to me. I stood there for a long time, staring at that carved symbol. I thought of escape, of waking in my own time, leaving Whitechapel and its ghosts behind. But I knew that if I left, if I disappeared back into my own world, I would carry his shadow with me. The knowledge of what I had seen would follow. The failure to act would follow. I would always wonder whether I had stood at the very edge of preventing a legend from being born. I could not let that thought exist. So I made my decision. I would not simply track him. I would not simply witness the horrors that history had already written. I would intervene, not to rewrite history as the world knows it, but to face the man behind the myth, not as a scholar, not as a traveler, but as another human being who refused to allow darkness to stand unchallenged. I took one slow breath, then another. The fog curled around me like a living thing, swallowing the alley into quiet silence. And I stepped forward, deeper into Whitechapel, deeper into the unknown, deeper into the part of the story that history never recorded, the part where I stopped being a bystander and became something else entirely. The nights became longer. The cold settled into my bones, and yet I barely felt it anymore. I had stopped thinking of home as a place I might return to. The lab, the city lights, the clean order of my world. They felt distant now, unreal, like a dream fading upon waking. Here, every sensation was razor sharp. Every decision, a matter of survival. I started tracing the paths no one else saw, the shortcuts between dim gas lamps, the forgotten yards behind workhouses, the narrow, crooked alleys that twisted deeper into the city's hidden anatomy. And everywhere I went, I felt him, not seen, not heard, but present, like a breath on the back of my neck, a whisper just out of earshot. Whitechapel was his hunting ground, but it was also his canvas. And I had begun to understand the shape of his design. The killings were not random. They formed a pattern, a rhythm, a geography of intention. He wanted control. He wanted precision. He wanted an audience. And he had chosen me. The realization brought no fear, only clarity. I was no longer trying to catch him. I was learning how he moved, how he chose, how he struck. If I was to stop him, I had to stop thinking like a man from another century. I had to see the world through his eyes. Days blurred into nights. I slept in brief moments, curled behind stone steps, or inside abandoned stables. I ate when I could. I listened. I watched. I mapped the streets in my mind until I could walk them blind. And then, without warning, the city shifted. The usual clamor of the docks grew quiet. The market stalls emptied early. Doors closed faster. Whispers traveled faster still. People felt something in the air. A tension, a waiting. He was preparing again. The next act was coming. I stood at the edge of Miller's Court, where the fog gathered thick as wool, swallowing sound and movement. The cold night pressed against my skin. I knew what history would say about this place. I knew who lived here. I knew how the story was supposed to end. But history did not know me. Not yet. I tightened my grip on the piece of iron I carried. Heavy, solid, real. A weapon not of my world, but of his. I felt the weight of every decision that had led me to this moment. The mistakes, the desperation, the obsession, the terrible understanding that once you step into the river of time, you cannot simply step back out. The street behind me was empty. The world around me held its breath. And somewhere in the fog ahead, he was waiting. Weeks had passed since Whitechapel, yet the memories clung to me. I tried to bury them, the screams, the coal smoke, the blood. But today, while clearing old project equipment, I noticed something unusual. A fragment caught on the chronometer. Coarse black wool. Victorian in style, with dried blood. Over a century old. My hands trembled as I examined it under the microscope. Then I looked at the holographic display. The system had scanned historical records from 1888. And there it was. My face. Eris Thorne. Wanted for petty theft in Whitechapel. I wasn't just a visitor to the past. I was part of it. Documented. Recorded. And if I was in the record, so was he. The collector. He wasn't a phantom. He was real. And somewhere across time, he knew I was here. I paced the lab, haunted by every memory of the streets, the alleys, the gas lamps, the mist. I remembered the messages he had left, the stolen coat, the final proof on Catherine Eddowes' doorstep. Time had folded itself around me. I was part of a cycle of observation, intervention, and consequence. My knowledge, my existence, they were all variables in a game that stretched across centuries. The proof was tangible now. The fragment, the chronometer, the records, they were a warning, a message. I was not just an observer. I had been documented in history. And he, the collector, he was still out there, waiting, calculating, watching the flow of time. I stared into the green glow of the chronometer. The hum of servers around me was comforting, almost mundane, yet it reminded me that the world continued, indifferent. I drew a deep breath. The river of time carried him, me, and the lives I could not save forward endlessly. Somehow I had survived. For now,